Hey guys, this video is meant to be a direct follow-up to my first video on fantasy racism, so I'd recommend watching that first if you haven't, or if you feel you need a refresher, since I'll be referring to specific points from that one in this one. But I'm also not your boss, so do whatever makes you happy, I guess. Also, before I start the video proper, I actually need to issue an apology. I borrowed several points from YouTuber CD Cole for the Star vs and Dragon Age sections, and initially forgot to credit her. I'm not going to try to make an excuse for that. I'm normally much better about crediting people, but this time I just straight up fucking forgot, and that was dumb of me. CD, I'm sorry about that, and I'll do my best to make sure it doesn't happen again. I'll link to both videos down below, please check them out, they're really good. Okay, on with the show. Okay, so back in February, I made my Let's Talk About Fantasy Racism video, because it was a subject that had been consuming my brain for a while and it seemed like the right month to do so. And I was honestly kind of surprised by the reception. It did much better than I thought, and interacting with the commenters and hearing people's thoughts on the subject was really fun. Yes, even most of the brain dead ones where they tried to argue I had no understanding of how bigotry works. But it also led to some honestly quite interesting questions that I couldn't properly answer in the comments, and a couple of conversations that I felt the need to expand on, so here we are. And yes, this does mean I'll be talking about Frieren since the demons are apparently still a matter of debate. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, shall we? Starting with...
Nothing's gotta change, nothing stays the same. Drink the lemonade until we all are going great. Nothing's gotta change, drink the lemonade and green tea.
Okay, first point of order. Last time I brought up how Zootopia bungled its metaphor and said I felt Zootopia 2 did a little better because they'd largely narrowed the scope of the metaphor from the concept of racism in general to specifically the dehumanization and displacement of Native Americans, but also that I needed to rewatch the movie for a proper analysis. And having completed said rewatch, I would like to retract that statement. I no longer think they did it better. I honestly find this movie very frustrating because while the overarching plot is one big stolen land metaphor, everything breaks down in the minutiae. On the surface level, the movie is essentially about land back. The Linksley family stole the credit for the weather walls, murdered their maid and blamed a snake, and that led to the reptiles being driven from their land and snakes being driven from the city as a whole in a kind of kid-friendly version of the Trail of Tears. The entirety of the city of Zootopia is basically stolen land. It's a fairly apt, if extremely toned down allegory for what white people did to the Native Americans. Where the problem lies is that the writers refuse to stay focused on it or take the racism allegory seriously, because not only are the other reptiles coded as Latinx for some reason, but both reptiles and marine mammals are repeatedly just made into jokes where the punchline is, look how weird these people are. There's one scene where Nick pisses off a sea lion by committing several cultural faux pas, mostly so the writers have an excuse to have the beaver there, but everything after that is just one long string of joke after joke where the punchline is how weird and gross these people from a different culture are, to the point where Nick outright says he thinks reptiles are gross and scary, and the writers either forgot that the reptiles are meant to be people worthy of respect, or just didn't care, because it's treated like a normal squick thing instead of the honestly really racist statement that it is. This is the in-universe equivalent to someone being deadly serious when they say that Hispanic people make them sick, and not only is it not brought up, the entire bar scene is a painfully long and unfunny joke about how gross these Hispanic-coded people are, so you can laugh at how freaked out Nick is, and holy shit, it's so bad. Hamstringing the narrative and thematic integrity of your story for the sake of comedy is bad fucking writing. Oh my god, you actual fucking morons. I did talk about my issues with the film as a whole in a ramble, so you can check that out if you're so inclined, but it's really troubling just how eager the writers were to toss aside the themes of mutual understanding and respect so that they could fill the movie with more references and unfunny stereotype jokes. I honestly do not understand why the writers of this movie could not focus up for 5 fucking minutes, but it makes this movie so fucking frustrating to think about for any length of time. Second point of order. Someone in the comments said that they heard the theory that the reptiles were meant to be an allegory for Palestine because, and I cannot fucking believe I'm saying this, the father of the Linksleys has a Hebrew name. And while at the time I said, I don't know, maybe I have to think about it, because I was operating on 4 hours of sleep, it took only 4 seconds of thought to realize it's a fucking stupid idea, and it probably originally comes from a very anti-Semitic individual. First of all, Milton is not even remotely Hebrew in origin. It comes from Old English, and just because there is a Milton Jewish College does not mean it's a Jewish name. Second, and this is something I really need people to fucking understand, Jewish and Israeli are not the same thing. As much as Israel really wants you to equate the two so that they can use accusations of anti-Semitism to deflect when people bring up their innumerable war crimes and crimes against humanity, they are two very different groups which, in case you aren't aware, nearly every Jewish organization on earth has made super fucking clear by decrying Israel's ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. And it's also something that Israel itself has made clear by arresting Orthodox Jews who refuse to assist in said genocide. They are not the fucking same, do not treat them like they are. Third and finally, Disney straight up would not allow them to do something like that. Disney as a company tends to have a policy about not taking a moral stance on anything that isn't nearly universally accepted as good, and that's because they want everyone to give them their money. And since people tend to not give you their money when they take moral issue with you in either direction, they're definitely not going to take a stance, even a symbolic one, on the ongoing genocide that a bunch of Christian nutjobs are fanatically devoted to ensuring happens because they think it will cause the rapture and give their death cult the last laugh. No matter how blatantly obvious it is that committing genocide and other atrocities is fucking evil. So no, this is not an allegory for Palestine. Thank you for listening. Also, if I catch anyone being anti-Semitic in the comments, I will rip your throat out with my teeth. Zero tolerance for that bullshit. Anyway, moving on to the final point for this section, a couple of people brought up Beastars as the better version of Zootopia, which is kind of accurate and also kind of not. Beastars is a complicated topic because it's not strictly about racism in the same way it's not strictly about sexuality or gender or cannibalism or homoerotic tension. Beastars is probably the most wildly and widely applicable pieces of art I've ever seen, because the central theme is both extremely vague and weirdly universal. At its core, Beastars is about how those who are different are affected by and affect society. And as such, it can be read in a large variety of ways without ever really being right or wrong.
I think it's about sexism.
I thought it was about racism.
Maybe it's about homophobia.
What makes Beastars work so well is that Haru Itagaki is very interested in how society acts upon individuals and how that influences them and how they in turn influence the people around them, eventually coming back around to influencing society, especially where marginalized and minority groups are concerned. And this is etched into the very fabric of her work. At least it is in the manga, the anime kind of fucked it up. I had considered making a video on Beastars sometime, but Keith Ballard already made several multi-hour videos on it that are really good, and he's also far more passionate about this series than I am, so I'll recommend you watch his stuff instead. Also, read the manga. It's far from perfect, but it is way better than the anime. On a related note though, remember how last time I said Zootopia would have worked better if the plot had been more personal and low stakes? Well, I'd actually like to recommend The Day We Met, a comic by Frieren Falco. It's a safe-for-work furry comic about a musk deer named Pin who falls for a coyote named Indy and the ways they navigate their feelings for each other. Aside from being one of the most adorable comics I've ever fucking read, it actually explores the whole predator-prey racism dynamic in a way that the Zootopia writers could learn a thing or 50 from, and it does so in a respectful and entertaining manner. Pin actually spends a lot of time checking his own biases, and it takes the time to examine the biases of other characters as well. I'll link to Falco's Blue Sky down below. Please give it a look, it's really good. Okay, moving on.
Rest in peace to the me that you had in your head. Rest in peace to the me that you had in your head.
One of the more commonly brought up topics in the comments of the last video was XMen, which is honestly understandable. XMen is probably the most widely known example of fantasy racism, and it's also one of the biggest mixed bags you'll ever find. XMen started out as a rather clumsy metaphor for racism in the 60s before the trilogy attempted to make it an equally clumsy metaphor for being gay.
Have you tried not being a mutant?
But it'll never really get away from the racial coding at the core of the premise, though depending on the writers, it also tends to be applicable to most marginalized groups. It's got a wide strike range like that. The quality of the execution has also varied wildly with the many different writers the series has had, but there's definitely been more than a few times where it fucked things up. And while we could definitely talk about all the missteps the series has made, like half the Ultimate run of comics, the single biggest issue it's ever had has been the character of Magneto. Magneto is a character that has only really grown harder to villainize as the years pass and people become more aware of systemic and racial inequality, to the point that it's now kind of impossible to actually make him a believable bad guy because Magneto is correct. From the beginning, Magneto's whole thing was that he foresaw the oncoming attempted genocide of mutants, which people keep fucking trying, and decided that he would do anything to keep that from happening, even if it meant getting violent. And looking at that, you may wonder why he's a villain at all if his central motivation is preventing mass genocide. And the answer is honestly the same as with the White Fang. It's propaganda meant to slander groups like the Black Panthers and send the message that peaceful protest is the only correct course of action. And because of this, the series has to go to extreme lengths to ensure the audience won't end up siding with him. There's a trope known as boiling kittens in lava, wherein a character that would otherwise be too sympathetic and objectively correct on a moral issue does the most extremely evil thing to justify making them a villain at all. And Magneto is the unofficial fucking poster child for it. This is why he goes from I need to prevent genocide to I need to ensure mutant supremacy and kill all the normies. Bad writers do this a lot actually. They think that sympathetic villains with a point are better, but they make them too sympathetic and aren't smart enough to write an actual failing in their argument and just have them say, okay, genocide time. And it's so fucking dumb. But this is actually made even worse by the fact that in the late 80s they changed Magneto's backstory to make him a Holocaust survivor. I feel like I need to repeat that point so it really sinks in. They made their villain a Holocaust survivor who wants to prevent another Holocaust from happening to his people. This is who they keep trying to make the bad guy, and it does not work. And even trying to pull this off says way fucking more about you as a person than it ever will about the character. It is the second dumbest decision Marvel ever made, with the first being this fucking travesty.
There are thousands of men on those ships, good, honest, innocent men. They're just following orders.
I've been at the mercy of men just following orders. Never again.
XMen First Class was a shit movie by most metrics, but the absolute worst thing about it, and I can't believe nobody punched every person in the writer's room for even suggesting it, was making Magneto's turn to villainy, killing a Nazi, and his declaration of said villainy, the words actual Jewish Holocaust survivors say. There's a very good reason Magneto has largely stopped being written as a villain, and it's because it was a bad idea from the start. You can only make a villain so sympathetic before the very fact that they are a villain reflects poorly on you as a writer, and this is doubly true if they're part of a marginalized group. That's not to say it can't be done well, but doing so requires a level of skill that a lot of people just do not seem to have, and trying to walk that balance is often just not worth it. So proceed with the utmost fucking caution if you're really that intent on doing so, which I really don't recommend. Alright, moving on. Alright, so from here on we get into the topics I've really been looking forward to discussing. In the first video, I brought up the topic of the oppression of mages in the Dragon Age games, focusing on the second game where the writers made the horrible mistake, really, of trying to both sides the genocide of mages at the hands of the Templars. And you cannot fucking both sides genocide no matter how hard you try to justify it. A surprising number of people took issue with my conclusion in that segment, and the most common argument against my conclusion came down to one point. Mages are inherently dangerous and therefore should be feared. And quite a few of them gestured to the point I made in the Zootopia segment about how it's bad writing and fucks up your metaphor when you make the oppressed minority pose an inherent threat, which was an interesting application of my point, I suppose. I will actually take partial responsibility for people's misunderstanding, as I kind of used threat and danger interchangeably when they're really not, so let me clear this up right now. Somebody is not a threat because they possess the capability to cause you harm. A person is a threat because they possess the intent to cause you harm, and there is a massive fucking difference between those two things. See, there are two major problems with arguing that mages are inherently dangerous because of their magic, and the first point is that it is an entirely asinine statement with logic that falls apart if applied anywhere else, because it relies on the prospect that because a mage could hurt you, then they should be feared. Allow me to ask you this, viewer. Do you spend your life terrified of every living creature on Earth? Because every person or animal you've ever met has the capacity to harm you, and that does not make them an inherent threat. Is a child inherently threatening because they could bite you? Is a chef an inherent threat because they could poison your food and you wouldn't know until it's too late? Is a bodybuilder an inherent threat because she's stronger than you and could snap your neck like a toothpick? No, of course they aren't. That's completely ridiculous. Bigots like the Templars just present the mere possibility of a group they don't like presenting a danger as if it is the same as them presenting an inherent threat. to justify their mistreatment and try to win people over by sounding logical, because if they were honest about their actual intent, then people wouldn't side with them. They've done it IRL with all non-white people, LGBT people, autistic people, and just any group they don't think should exist. And once you realize that, you can see every single one of their arguments as the excuses for bigotry that they are. And this is what brings us to the other major problem with arguing mages are inherently dangerous. You're using the exact same language and logic as the group attempting genocide. And you probably don't even realize it. See, the real problem with parroting the mages are inherently dangerous argument is that you are using the reasoning of a group committing a genocide and therefore, whether you mean to or not, are arguing in favor of their treatment of the mages. You are implicitly condoning mage genocide by even considering that line of logic. The thing is though, I don't actually begrudge the people who made these points. You were likely a teenager when you first played the game. You had a teenager's understanding of the world and of these kinds of conflicts and probably never actually went back to consider it after you grew up and gained a greater understanding and context. And it doesn't help that up until Veilguard, the games kept trying to reinforce the Templars' actions and villainize the mage rebellions, and it just does not fucking work because they're still trying to make genocide a morally grey issue. Hell, Inquisition tried to force this point even harder by giving you multiple companions who outright call the mage rebellion selfish and actively serve as retroactive propaganda for the writing of the former game. Here's the thing though, and I know this is going to sound dismissive, but follow me on this. Grow the fuck up. Part of maturing is learning to re-examine the things you've been told about the world and come to a new understanding. And this holds just as true for the art we engage with. I mean, fuck me, this is something Dragon Age itself actually did. Something I was kind of surprised nobody commented on, because usually when I say something positive about the game, at least 3 people pop up to throw a shit fit about how much they hate it, was when I said that Veilguard was when the Dragon Age writers grew the fuck up and started to approach the subject with actual maturity, and I stand by the statement. Veilguard was actually the point where the series matured quite a bit. And I mean real maturity, not the combination of sensitive topics and dark themes haphazardly thrown together that idiots think is mature, but is actually the most childish thing in the goddamn world. Actual maturity means approaching sensitive and heavy subjects both seriously and with respect, and that's something the game did with several topics, not the least of which being the mages and, honestly, the subject of racism in general. There's a quest in the game that I absolutely love, because despite being short and easily missed if you're not focusing on maxing out the factions, it addresses the mage genocide with the respect and gravity sorely lacking in the previous games. The quest in question is called The Wrongs of Annulment, which is a fantastic name that already tells you you're in for something special, and this is the introduction to it.
We keep this land safe for spirits, so that no harm comes to them or to the people who live here. That is why I asked for your help.
Right. What do you need me to do?
Years ago, when mages rebelled across southern Thedas, Templars from the southern Chantry marched upon Ravine. They declared our mages criminals and killed many of us. The unacknowledged pain of that injustice twists spirits into demons. Stop the demons and let compassion ease that pain, and the land will be safer.
I'll see what I can do.
In case you missed that, the Templars used the Mage Rebellion as an excuse to invade another country and start slaughtering the innocent mages that lived there. And the game does not pretend it is anything but an act of truly monstrous barbarism, as you face demons born from the emotions of the people involved, the pain of the massacred, the envy of power, and the spirit of the hateful fuck leading the purge. And after each one you hear the story of it from the spirit of compassion, and it is horrifying.
Glinting, gleaming, stealing us with steel, splinters flying as they kick in the door to our home. Baking in my armor, so much hotter here than back in Ferelden. Kill on sight. But they don't look like abominations. They just look sad. We ran, but they chased us. We tried to surrender, but they killed us as we knelt. The spirits roar as the fire comes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The wood will always be scorched, but the rain has washed away the fire and smoke. Thank you.
It's important to note that this kind of inhumane slaughter was what the Templars had already been doing unprovoked to mages in Ferelden long before the rebellion. They'd simply used the actions of Anders as an excuse to extend their reach, just as people keep using the existence of Tevinter to excuse the Templars' actions against mages as a whole. This is what they'd always been doing. From the very first game, they'd always been this monstrous. They'd always been this horrible. This is what a mature take on the subject looks like, because once you stop trying to force the conflict to be morally grey, and once you stop trying to make excuses for the Templars, all you're left with are the broken families, shattered lives, and the mountainous pile of corpses that were once innocent people. There is no defense for this, nor will there ever be. I talked about this a while ago in my Veilguard review, but there's a problem with online discourse where people equate darkness with maturity, but most of the things they hold up as being both dark and mature are actually neither. They're just edgy and childish, and this has been an issue with the Dragon Age games for a long time. An issue that Veilguard bucks by approaching its dark subject matter with a level of sincerity and seriousness, which is something a lot of people either missed or just straight up ignored because they were too busy whining about the aesthetics and the fact that the game says the word non-binary to pay attention to the actual story being told, which is a shame because Veilguard has some extremely potent things to say about a great many topics. I'm not going to go into all of them because I have an entire review you can watch if you're curious, but I will go into one more bit of the game for this video because there's actually a really good writing lesson to be gained from it, and that bit is Harding's loyalty quest. Harding's questline is something I never really see anyone else talk about, which is weird because it's an incredibly potent look at the damage caused by colonialism and conquest. To keep it brief, the dwarves in Dragon Age are the children of the Titans, and eons ago, the elven gods bled the Titans for their lyrium so they could use it to make themselves bodies. And when the Titans took obvious issue with this, the Evanurus made them tranquil, lobotomizing the Titans and, as a consequence, severing the connection the dwarves had to their progenitors and to each other. The dwarves are the victims of cultural genocide, having had their identity as a people robbed of them and not even remembering they had it to begin with. And learning this truth and reconnecting with that history is what Harding's questline is all about.
We sold lyrium to the Tevinter Imperium. Titan blood, our blood, traded for gold, so they could use it for magic. The elves stole lyrium from the Titans to make themselves bodies. And eons later, we gave it to a new generation of mages. All on our own. It's sad, isn't it?
The problem is, because Harding is so conflict averse, she pushes her righteous anger over what the Evanurus did to her people down and ignores it. But this isn't the kind of thing you can just bottle up and deal with never, so her unaddressed pain and anger manifests from her power and starts lashing out until she finally confronts it.
Look at me! Don't you remember? They broke us into 1,000,000 pieces, and this is all that's left!
Anger and pain. My anger and my pain.
You cast me out!
I couldn't bear it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
They built their world on the wreckage of us. Vengeance is all we have.
And this is where a lesser writer would demonize Harding's anger and need for justice as a completely bad thing, like so many other shit writers do, but the game doesn't do that. Instead, it takes her pain seriously and presents her with two options: focus on her compassion, or embrace her anger as a focused tool. And it is so very fucking important that they did not present embracing her anger as the wrong or evil choice.
You took everything from us. And you thought you won. But we're still here. We're different. But we're not gone. We will thrive in spite of you.
This comes back to what I said in the last video about how the attitude that peaceful protest is the only valid form of protest is a problem. Treating marginalized groups or survivors as if their completely justified anger is unwarranted is bad. And it stems from a completely childish logic that demands people not make you uncomfortable in order to be considered victims worthy of respect. Stories like that are propaganda tools that strip minority groups of power by forcing them to play the role of the perfect victim in order to be taken seriously. And it's something that a lot of media does that Veilguard simply refuses to because the writers chose to approach the topic with respect and maturity. This is an important lesson to be taken for your writing. You need to take minority groups and victims of oppression seriously, and you need to treat their anger over their oppression as something that is okay to have, because refusing to do so is both disrespectful and immature. To imply that any group who has suffered oppression and violence has no right to their anger, or that their anger will somehow corrupt them into being worse than their oppressor is fucking disgusting. Be mature and respectful. It's really not that hard.
Oh my God, you are the devil.
Okay, now we're finally at the big one, the one I was simultaneously most looking forward to and dreading talking about. I had a decent number of people commenting about Frieren and demons and the fandom, enough that I felt it needed to be talked about in its own video, which is ultimately what turned into this one. This is actually a little odd for me because I really don't tend to talk about fandom or the discourse surrounding my video topics, and there's two main reasons for that. The first is that I honestly just don't pay attention because I don't really care about fandom drama, and usually have whatever is going on brought to my attention after the fact, or if someone brings it up in my Patreon Discord. And the second reason is that discussing fandom bullshit often feels a little too close to drama content for my liking. And since I have both integrity and a soul, I would rather chop my own hands off and type up every future script with only my tongue than make anything remotely similar to the soulless simmering garbage that the shambling pathetic husks of humanity that populate drama YouTube churn out on a daily basis. So unless it's extremely and unfortunately relevant to the topic at hand, I don't usually fucking bother. Sadly it is relevant this time, so here we are. Apparently for a while now there's been a bit of a debate over the execution of the demon race in Sosona Frieren, and it's also apparently attracted a bunch of outspoken racists, which doesn't surprise me but not for the reason you'd expect. Let's address those points in order because I said so. So some people feel that making the demons an inherently evil race is racist and a little problematic, which I can understand. But I need you to follow me on this because I'm about to blow your mind. It isn't racist or bad because the demons aren't people. And I don't mean that in the derogatory way or in the they're not real so it doesn't matter way, but really quite literally. The demons literally are not people, they are monsters. And I'm about to explain why this isn't a problem either, so hold off on that comment until you've actually listened to my points, please. The reason inherently evil races are bad is because they work on the logic of ontological morality as decided by humanity, which has a long history of extreme racism. Or to put it in layman's terms, it says a person is inherently wrong or evil because they were born to a specific group of people, which is the logic that real-life racists have historically used to excuse their oppression of minority groups, be they Black, Romani, Jewish, Mongolian, or anyone else. Also tends to be lazy, but that's neither here nor there, because where evil races tend to be the most problematic is how they incorporate racial coding. For those who don't know, coding is when non-human characters are given characteristics that connect them to a certain real-life group, which can be physical, cultural, or linguistic in nature. It's this coding that tends to be the biggest problem, because when you say that a people who possess these specific qualities are inherently bad or wrong or evil, you are implicitly saying that about the group you've coded them as. This is, by the way, why the depiction of goblins and things like Harry Potter are considered racist caricatures, because they are often coded with malicious Jewish stereotypes. That is also, person who was busy having a stroke in my comment section, what I was referring to when I talked about the problematic nature of Tolkien's attitude on race, which was something the man himself would later admit was bad. That and the description of the orcs as having the traits of the least lovely Mongol types. And all of that brings us back to the demons, who may seem like an evil race problem at a cursory glance, but upon actual examination aren't an issue. As I said earlier, the demons aren't people, they're monsters. Demons are monsters that evolved to better prey upon humanity by learning to speak and taking on their appearance, and everything about the design is largely done with that in mind. And while that may prompt a person to question if it isn't just racially biased propaganda, the demons themselves admit this.
Wild beasts who only communicate with lies. It's not an inaccurate description. She can see us for what we are. No one else in this town understands our true nature. Or perhaps she's just logical. She knows there's but one reason to learn our prey's language.
Demons aren't misunderstood or villainized. They are actual literal monsters who only exist to prey upon humanity, and their greatest weapon is their words. It's their ability to deceive their prey and take advantage of their empathy or naivety or just human nature in general, and we see this time and time again. What's more, demons are bereft of any coding that would align them with an outgroup. With rare exceptions, demons look and dress like humans do, and it's really only their horns that set them apart physically. This is by design. People are far more willing to listen to someone that looks like them and seems reasonable, but it's all a facade. Even young demons function the same way.
I figured out a way to make things right. Here, take this child as a replacement for your offspring, the one I ate.
That girl is the daughter of the village chief.
Yes, but he isn't alive anymore.
Why call out to a mother? Demons are monsters, and like all monsters, they don't raise their young. Once born, you are abandoned. You walk this world alone. That makes you ruthless, solitary creatures. Lone wolves with no concept of what family means. Explain. Why would you call out to a mother you've never known?
It's simple. That word stops humans. It keeps them from murdering us. Isn't that magical?
Taken even further, demons don't have a cultural identity either, and they lack any coding associated with any real-life group that would separate them from the human characters. They don't raise their young. The groups they form are held together by pure strength alone, and aside from their tendency to focus on improving their magic, their deference to strength and their homicidal instincts, they don't even have a connecting philosophy or belief system to bind them together as a people. Calling them the demon race is honestly kind of misleading, because they're not a race any more than mimics are a race. Combat challenge aside, the demons also serve the important function of being the narrative foil to Frieren herself. Frieren's journey is all about learning to connect to and understand people. She's attempting to understand humanity so she never regrets not having known someone precious again. The demons, meanwhile, have a very intimate understanding of human nature, but only from the perspective of a predator. They know what buttons to push and what words to say to gain the upper hand, but they fundamentally cannot fathom human emotion or empathy or connection or anything that might display a deeper hidden humanity that would actually make them people at all. You can certainly argue that it would be more interesting if they were a complex people, but that's a matter of personal taste, not racism. And that finally brings us to the topic of racists in the fandom. Like I said, I'm not surprised that a bunch of racists have attached themselves to the show. Anime in general already attracts plenty of racist losers, and Frieren is the single most popular anime in the world. So of course they'll make their way into that fandom too. And this is because a racist's biggest goal is to be normalized. You might think their goal is to be racist, but that's not a goal, that's just what they enjoy being. No, racists want to normalize their presence because being normalized means that it's being accepted, and less people are pushing back against them, which allows them to continue to be racist with no fear of repercussion. But don't worry, because I'm going to teach you the secret to stopping that from happening. You know what you do when racists start to try to creep their way into a place? You make it as inhospitable an environment for them as fucking possible. Do not fucking accept that they're inevitable and there's nothing you can do. You fucking push them out until they have no choice but to shut the fuck up, or crawl their way back to whatever slimy, hateful subreddit or 4chan forum they spawned from. Because allowing them to sit around and stink up the place with their bullshit is completely unacceptable. Would you like to know the other reason why racists want to colonize Frieren? It's because if they do, and you start to think of it as the racist show, then you won't connect the dots and realize that they aren't Frieren in this scenario. They are the demons. Just like the demons, they are loathsome creatures that utilize the facade of logic and respectability to be accepted so they can hurt whoever they want and not be stopped. And Frieren does to demons what you should do to every fascist, white supremacist, Nazi, or any other racist piece of vile garbage who thinks it has any place in a functioning society.
Let's talk this through!
And just in case you need to be told, fucking think it through before you decide someone is racist. Don't throw the word around just because you don't like someone. Be critical and thoughtful and deliberate, and do not give them a fucking inch. If a fandom becomes racist, the fault lies equally with the racists as it does with the people who did not fight back against it and say, this is not welcome here. It is the moral failing of a community as a whole when a fascist feels safe out in the open. There, you may now proceed with your angry comments if you wish. Anyway, that should just about do it for this video. Thank you for watching, and a huge thanks to my patrons for their support, especially Wisteria, Lustrous Lizard, Tetraphobe49, and Owen Oofs. You guys are the real friends we made along the way. I was originally planning on calling this video a brief follow-up, but that would be a lie because nothing I've made lately has been remotely brief. I hope you enjoyed this rare direct follow-up and that you found it the slightest bit entertaining or educational. I had originally planned to get this out sooner, but I was busy working on my 2-hour-long Scarlet Hollow video, so this took a back seat. You should watch that, by the way, or better yet, just go and buy and play the game because it's really fucking good. Anyway, I've got a Queer Tropes video to get started on, so I'll just say that I hope you have a lovely day and I'll see you next time. Bye!